All right, we are now live, and I've got my mic sitting over here next to me. Hopefully, that'll work a little bit better than they have in the past. I'm up in our library slash bedroom. It's not particularly well lit because we don't have an overhead light, but we'll see if we can get the lighting a little bit better. There we go. So, it's Valentine's Day, and we aren't doing much for it because it's super cold outside today. But we're gonna have some sushi a little bit later and relax and enjoy ourselves, and then probably get back to work. Quite frankly, but I was thinking about something that was kind of interesting. Um, about Valentine's Day, an old memory. And let me actually address Costas. What is the purpose of this live stream? Exactly what it says in the description. It's an impromptu live stream. I do these sort of things as philosophy pop-ups quite frequently. People ask questions and make comments, and I respond to them, and that's the shtick, right? That's how we do things. But I got my first metal album on a Valentine's Day a long time ago, and it was Kiss Destroyer. We were really into Kiss on my block, and I hung out with the older boys, and some of them had like Kiss Alive or Love Gun and stuff like that. And so my mom knew how into Kiss we were because I was like constantly talking about Ace Frehley, the spaceman, and we would draw with our crayons, the different Kiss people, and I was always into Ace Frehley. And so she got, I don't remember what she got from my sister, but she got me the Kiss Destroyer album, and she was like, "Happy Valentine's Day," and it was totally out of the blue because we'd never done Valentine's Day presents before, and I don't think we ever did them again. Um, and so it was kind of an interesting thing. I had other metal things before I like really got into metal, before we sort of identified it as such. Like I had Def Leppard's Pyromania on tape. But and I'll tell the story some other time, or if we reach a lull in this at some point, about how I got more into it around the age of 13 or so, through a buddy of mine recording an Iron Maiden song on a cassette tape that he put Van Halen's 1984 on, and there was a little bit of room, so he put Iron Maiden's The Trooper, and that really got me going with metal. And then it's been the rest of my life. All right, let me start taking some of these questions. A lot of people saying hello. Then that's very nice. Happy Valentine's Day to different people. Dan the man has a practical question. I'm about to give a presentation of my senior thesis to Mississippi Academy of Science. Do I have any tips for giving presentations? I'm very, very nervous. That's actually a really good question. And I'm going to move the mic a little bit so things aren't bobbling around so much. Yeah, I do have some bits of advice that might be helpful. But first, congratulations on getting your senior thesis done. That's really excellent. And I'm imagining, like my senior thesis, I just presented it to, a panel of 3 professors. But the Academy of Science, that sounds like kind of a big deal. So that's really cool. I mean, I would say, practice your presentation a couple times before, and do it with do like one run through with your friends, and just tell them to, like, the first run through, because they already know you're nervous. Don't have them give any tips or critique or anything. Just tell them to sit down and shut up and watch you, and just run through it like you would the whole thing. And then maybe, on another day, have them give you some tips. Another thing that I will say, you see a lot with first-time presenters or early career presenters, is talking really fast, talking too fast for the audience. So it may sound a little silly to you, but I would say, deliberately slow yourself down. And you may be able to, it depends on how self-aware you are. And when you're presenting, you can go from being a very self-aware person to being a less self-aware person. But I would say, if you can, Try to, try to like slow your diction down and don't worry about getting everything in. And it'll help you. Your thoughts will, I think, become more clear as you're going on. I know there's a tendency to speed things up, but that's pretty important not to. And maybe you have somebody else in the audience as well. Like if you start talking really fast, they can like give you a hand signal or something. And the other thing I would say is if you misstate something, you can always back it up and say, "Oh, I think I misstated something. Let me you know clarify this," because nobody's expecting you to do a polished TED talk sort of performance, right? I'm assuming. So maybe that would help you a bit. um all right, let's see what else we got here. This is hard. Geese von Merbel, maybe. Any current day music you're into? Some contemporary metal stuff. When older bands make new stuff, like Judas Priest has Firepower that came out. We saw that tour. I listened to it, and Saxon has a new album that's not too old, and there's stuff like that. And then there's some newer bands. I in the genre music, I like doom metal, so like Orchid, you would consider newer, but I don't think they've put anything out for quite a while. So yeah, there's some stuff. And then there's bands that my kids or my wife like that I have come to appreciate. Like I enjoy. It's a good thing I do because they listen to it constantly when they're here. I enjoy Lizzo. I've come to enjoy some Imagine Dragons, because my kids are into that as well. So there's that. Um, let's see. William asks, any advice for studying natural theology for self-directed learners? Thank you again. So natural theology, we're talking about, um, what's often called philosophy of religion. It's making arguments and going into exposition and trying to get to the bottom of what is this thing that we call God, and God's relations with the rest of the universe, by means of primarily reason and experience rather than relying directly on revealed theology, right? So are there any tips? It depends on who you're looking at. I guess I would say that important in anything with religion is to bracket your own beliefs and figure out what people are actually claiming and saying. That's quite important. um, and you know I always say place a primacy on understanding first, and then on agreement, and then on appreciation. You want to make sure that you thoroughly understand where a thinker is coming from. And the other thing I would say too is the dividing line between philosophy on one side and theology or faith or religion on the other side, that is a shifting border. And it's to define where the border lies is a philosophical or a theological act, and there's always presuppositions. So there's no perfectly neutral way to go about it. There's always assumptions being made, so I would try to be like cognizant of that. All right. Leonardo asks, how do I create discipline? Do I have any tips? Um, I don't have any tips, but I do have a sort of quip. And that's, you create discipline bit by bit by behaving in a disciplined way, failing, and then picking yourself up, and then being a little bit more disciplined. So usually when we're asking about like how to create a new habit, it's because it's not there and we'd like it to be there, and we're doing something else that we probably shouldn't be doing instead, right? So how do you change your habits? How do you change your ways of approaching things? How do you change your assumptions that you're making and your emotional responses and sort of knee-jerk reactions. A lot of that requires being attentive to what's going on. So one thing that could be helpful is journaling, or even when I'm working with clients and doing workshops, I often like have worksheets that aren't even quite at the level of journaling, but like let's say it's anger management, right? It's got like a tracker for each day, and like, did I lose my temper? What did I lose my temper over? What was going through my head at the time? So like keeping track of those sorts of things, and gradually you come to understand your motivations and what's happening with you, right? So I would say that that might be helpful. But the other thing is, don't get too discouraged when you fail, because when you're trying to do something new, trying to create a new path for yourself, um, the reason you're going to fail, and you're going to fail a lot at the start, because it's a new path for yourself. So you don't want to get yourself caught in this cycle where like you set these super high goals for yourself, and of course you fail at it, and then you feel crappy, and then you're like, oh, I got to find some way to compensate for this. So you deny that you failed, or you minimize how you failed. It's better to say, oh man, this is crap. I really screwed up. I guess I'm starting over at day one. Sort of like those things where it shows like, so we've gone this many days without an accident or an injury in the plant. Well, when it happens, you go back to zero, but you're not, if you're working at it, you're not really going back to zero, because you have made a little bit of progress, and it starts to get easier. And you can, I guess that would be a third thing. You could remind yourself that when you start feeling down about not being disciplined, you can remind yourself that you have made some progress, provided you have made some progress. So, all right. Here's a question about Plato from Toby. After having seriously read the Timaeus, the Meno, and the Phaedo, I must ask you, to what extent do you think Plato believes in the doctrine of reincarnation? That's a good question. So there's really kind of two ways to go with that. One would be to say, oh, this is just kind of symbolic, and it's not really Plato's own view. He's doing something else there. But then you got to explain what exactly he's doing. And I've never found a really satisfactory explanation for that. Or you say, okay, he is serious about this notion of reincarnation. And how do we reconcile these accounts? Because there's also one too in the Republic, right? In the book 10. So Meno, Phaedo, there's also the Phaedrus. Does it come up in any other places? I'd have to think about that. It's been a while since I've thought about this particular topic. But one of the challenges is of explaining exactly what's supposed to be going on there, because Plato says these are myths, right? This is not a rational exposition in dialectic the way something else might be. Another thing you can do too is you can look at Middle and Neoplatonist accounts where they try to harmonize this stuff. That might be helpful as well. But I personally, I think that Plato is serious about reincarnation. Let's see here. Marcellus, here's a politics question. What do I think about the U.S. foreign policy in destroying secular Arab states in favor of Muslim Brotherhood and even terrorist groups, which isn't in the interest of anyone, including us citizens? Well, yeah, when you put it like that, that sounds like a bad idea, right? If you're talking about like the Gulf War II, the dismantling of the Saddam Hussein regime and the Ba'athist state, I think that and I actually was for getting rid of Hussein, but I didn't want to see a power vacuum afterwards. Seemed like we're quite good at taking things down because we've got this immense military power that we can extend all over the place, and then we're terrible at actually putting things back together in any reasonable way that takes account of what's going on in the place and how to build lasting coalitions that would be stable, and so we did a terrible job at reconstruction, and we're still paying the price, almost 2 decades later, and we probably will be for decades yet to come. So I don't think that keeping, if you're talking about totalitarian secular Arab states, I don't think that's a great thing to have there. Hussein was horrible to his people. I actually had a cousin who was in forced recon, and I was corresponding with him as he was one of the first people to go into Iraq, and we were corresponding about just war theory and what was going on. And he was telling me about some of the stuff that was being reported to him by locals that they'd gone through just in recent years, and how happy they were to be essentially liberated. And so, there's something to that, but then you don't want things just to degenerate into, it doesn't have to be Muslim Brotherhood. There's all sorts of other things that could be equally problematic as well. And so we have to do more than just break things and say mission accomplished. We actually have to do real reconstruction if we're going to be involved in any of these sorts of things. I'm still trying to get the lighting a little bit better. There, we don't want the light on screen because it's so strong. But yeah, so that's my take on that. William has another question. Any suggestions for someone giving their first lecture as a teacher? I feel I will bore my students. Okay, well, yeah, so I do, in fact, have a few things to say. One is, I would say, I'm not sure why you would necessarily bore your students, but pick something that you think is intrinsically interesting, and that probably has a good, there's enough there that they can get into, and it's readable enough for them to get into it. Maybe you don't have much control over your curriculum, though, and so you're kind of stuck on whatever it is that you've got to teach. Then you have less flexibility, right? But you can, you can do some things ahead of time that might help you. Maybe see if you can come up with some interesting examples, and have them either in your notes, or you could create a handout for your students. That's a great way to get ideas across. Somebody who I'm a big fan of, I think a lot of people know, I'm a big fan of St. Anselm of Canterbury. That's one major way that he taught, was by using what we call similitudes or likenesses. He said, well, this is like this, and so let's unpack that. Analogies would be another way of talking about it. And I would say also be ready for weird, oddball questions to come up. And you can sort of be open and say, well, this isn't exactly what we're talking about, but let's see if we can field this. And I think you'll probably do okay. Of course, I don't know you, so right. Yeah. All right, Marcellus Tacitus, what is your take on Islam? That's a really broad question. That's like saying, what do you think about Buddhism, or what do you think about Hinduism? All sorts of things. It's one of the major world religions, and which sort of version or interpretation of it are we talking about? There's a lot of that would have to be unpacked there. So, all right. Quentin says, taking a break from Half Hour Hegel to check this out. Oh, that's very nice. I'm glad you're enjoying that. And Quentin also says, Firepower is Priest's best album in like 25 years. So how far back would that go? 25 years. We're in 2020, so you'd be talking 1995. Well, I'd probably go along with that, because my favorite albums are basically up to Defenders of the Faith. I thought Turbo, there's some good songs on there, but I didn't really like the departure into so much synth. And Ram It Down was good, in some respects, and not so great in other respects. I really think that Priest's best album is, in my view, Sin After Sin. And then I would probably say Screaming for Vengeance. Firepower is fun. Seeing Judas Priest live is a lot of fun. We have seen them 4 times in the last 10 years, my wife and I. 2 times out east and 2 times here in Milwaukee. So we've seen them with Thin Lizzy, who else? Oh, Steel Panther, Uriah Heep, Saxon, and Black Star Riders. So that's pretty good. All right. Giorgio asks, do I think Aristotle was an atheist? Would he have appreciated medieval Christianity with its logos more than the paganism of his own time? I don't think Aristotle was an atheist. He certainly seems to think that there's something going on in the superlunary realm. It's not quite clear what is exactly going on, and I'm not a specialist on on the heavens or things like that. But he definitely talks about theos, so he's not an atheist, and he seems to think that there's something happening with like the planets and the stars and all that, and it's kind of interesting stuff. Would he have appreciated medieval Christianity more than the paganism of his own time? Depends on, it's sort of like the Islam question. Who's medieval Christianity? Because we're like all over the map. If he ran into, say, Peter Damian, he'd be like, oh, I don't need these people. Peter Damian said that not only philosophy, but grammar was a tool of the devil, right? So, you're not going to have much traction with somebody like Aristotle. If Aristotle had been able to hang out with Boethius, who was translating Aristotle, by the way, or Erigena, or Alcuin, or Anselm, or Eloise, or Abelard, or let alone Thomas Aquinas, I think he probably would have enjoyed chatting with them. And it's kind of an interesting hypothetical to think about, isn't it? So yeah, I mean, the paganism of his time was never a coherent system. And, we often portray it as, well, there were the 12 gods and stuff like that. No, it was just a mishmash of all these different cults. And then you got Homer and Hesiod and the tragedians mixed up with it. And so it was kind of a mess, really. But yeah, it's a good question. All right. Let's see. What else do we have? Oops, it skipped a little bit. So John asked me my Valentine, Dr. Sadler. Well, I'm already, my wife's Valentine, so I can't do that. Jake McCulley, what publications would you recommend to a layperson hoping to keep up with the academic philosophical community? You mean like what websites or what journals? I don't know. I mean, I don't think that's answerable because there's just like so much stuff getting churned out. I don't think anyone can keep up with the current academic community. In a way, we live in a really great time because we have so much access to stuff. And then we also live in a terrible time because we have so much access to stuff, right? It's impossible to stay on top of more than just a small area in philosophy, unfortunately. So I don't have any good suggestions on that. Colin asks any thoughts generally on Peter Sloterdijk's work, specifically as ideas of general ascetology and co-immunism from You Must Change Your Life. I haven't read him, so I can't comment. I know I can say this: his fans are really into him, and I've been recommended to check him out, but I just haven't gotten around to it. I'm usually at any given point in time a little bit behind in my own reading and commitments to get things read. So I'm looking over there at books that are stacked up that I'm supposed to have reviewed in videos months ago. All right, here's one from Jeese. Lizzo is actually really good for a pop artist. Good on you for being open-minded. Yeah, I really like her stuff. I mean, I do like quite a lot of other music other than just metal, There's bands and artists who I really enjoy from all sorts of eras, and her stuff is really well put together. I enjoy it, and I like that it's also kind of free and raunchy and fun and yeah. I mean, I'm not big into pop or R&B or stuff like that, but there's people might be surprised about the kind of things that I actually do like, um, kind of bands that I like. All right, this is from Adrian. Could you give some suggestions for films that explore philosophical themes, especially nihilism and dealing with meaninglessness? What are my favorites? Well, that changes the game when you ask about nihilism. Because I was going to say, yeah, I mean, like, people always bring up The Matrix, but I actually prefer Dark City for that. And I used to show in my classes, I would show Memento as well, right, which deals with memory. I mean, there's a lot of really good films out there from a philosophical perspective. I would say anything that's originally based on a Philip K. Dick book or short story is usually a great starting point. And my absolute favorite when it comes to that, both in the books and in the movies, is A Scanner Darkly, which is about it's about drugs and the nature of reality, and there's sort of kind of cops and dissidents stories mixed in there, and there's a lot of like thinking about, do the ends justify the means. Dick himself, although he took a lot of drugs, was also in some respects anti-drug because he thought that it had really destroyed an entire generation. This sort of easy hedonistic lifestyle. But nihilism. Okay, so I mean, jokingly, we could say The Big Lebowski, of course, right? Because there's nihilists in there, but they don't really play much of a role. And I don't know that the movie itself is really that nihilistic. I will say though that as another thing you could say is, as a Coen Brothers movie, some of those can be quite nihilistic. Especially think about their first one, Blood Simple, which is a neo-noir. That's kind of a good one for that. Another movie that I thought I saw it in the theaters, and I actually thought it was really quite funny at the end. The Ninth Gate, Johnny Depp. It's like an occultist kind of movie. He's searching after this thing to like open up these 9 gates and experience transcendence. The people in the theater were pissed when that movie ended because, and I won't actually tell you how it ends. I'll just say the ending makes perfect sense, but a lot of viewers watch it and are enraged at how it ends. Is it nihilistic? Not exactly, but it kind of deals with that. Another thing that I would say is kind of interesting as well, dealing with the problem of meaninglessness. And I forget the name of this Polish filmmaker. He's the guy who did the Tricolor thing after the Iron Curtain came down, red, blue, white. Prior to that, he did a set of short, essentially I think they were TV episodes called The 10 Commandments. And you might say, oh, that sounds very religious. It's all about religious meaning. But he was incredibly good at like getting across the starkness of, Solidarity era Poland and what life was like. And he framed these little moral vignettes. Another director, of course, if you want to get into like nihilism, is Lars von Trier. He's kind of an acquired taste. So I think that could be useful, but I don't usually think so much about meaninglessness when I'm showing a movie for philosophical themes. I'm usually like having my students watch it so that we can then talk about what the other themes are, right? Maybe another good movie that I've shown my classes is Eat, Drink, Man, Woman, which is about family and how to deal with conflict. and it's got all this gorgeous food in it as well. And it's about vitality and life and that sort of thing. But that's not really about meaninglessness, except for maybe characters that have to figure out meaning in a new life. So, all right. Let's see. Factotum, what's my opinion of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, especially his ideas on duty, action, and following Christ? I haven't read Bonhoeffer since I was in graduate school, so I don't really have much to say about him, unfortunately. Scrolling down, looks like some people have some good suggestions here about um, about different movies. So No Country for Old Men. Yeah, that's a really good one, I'd say. Lyndon mentions the Decalogue. Solon spoke, very meaningful about meaninglessness. Okay, yeah, that's good too. Um, hmm. Yeah. I don't know. That might be something good to talk about in another thing down the line when I have more time to research movies and think about it. All right, so let's scroll back up and see what we've got here. So, we're talking about Lizzo. Slam RN wants to know how well I read German. I'm fine. I just don't speak it very well because I don't have any occasion to do so. Costas, how do you present a novel idea to someone else? Novel to them, you mean? Because I don't have an awful lot of novel ideas myself. I'm usually cobbling together ideas from other people. But how do you present an idea that somebody else has not been exposed to? It really depends on that person. I mean, if you're dealing with somebody who's very hostile to new ideas, you might need to candy coat it and introduce it to them in very small doses. There's other people who are like at the other extreme where they if it's a new idea, they want to hear about it. They can't get enough of new ideas, and maybe then you'd like pump the brakes a little bit, right? So I don't know. I think it really depends on the person. Stigern, do you think Camus was right about meaning and the absurd? I don't think that the world has the complete the complete lack of connection to our desires and rationality that he portrays it as having in Myths of Sisyphus. And remember, the absurd for him is a divorce between the human being and the world. It's a triadic relationship. I do think that the world does not have an like automatic clear meaning to it. I think human beings often talk as if it does, and it's up to us. I'm more like say Gabrielle Marcel or Simone de Beauvoir. She talks about the world being ambiguous, and Gabrielle Marcel talks about mystery, which means that we have to do a good bit of work to call out the meaning that's there in the world. And that a good bit of it also depends on the development that we ourselves engage in. So, all right. Nathan asks, I was wondering what Nietzsche's ideas on free will and determinism are. Yeah, that's a good question because there's a lot of people who make way too much of the eternal recurrence of the same, which Nietzsche doesn't say is the case. That would be like complete determinism, right? He presents it as kind of a hypothesis, and I don't really think that it's as essential to his thought as, say, will to power is, or the clash between different kinds of morality, or things along those lines. I think that Nietzsche is he's willing to say that many things do operate deterministically, but there is this capacity for new things to arrive on the scene. Now, how do they arrive on the scene? It's not pure randomness. We can like formulate projects and ways of doing things for ourselves and thereby exercise some degree of freedom, but there's nothing like free will in the sense of like, oh, I can like snap my fingers and do things completely differently, be not determined by anything else prior to where I am. But there's very few philosophers who believe in free will in that respect. That tends to be more of a caricature of free will than anything else. So, all right. Lyndon asks, what do you think of the idea science does not have any one method, or the story of how science came about diverges widely from the romanticized version? Well, science, with a sort of capital S, meaning all of the sciences, does not have any one single method. I know there's the scientific method as people, teach it to us in elementary and middle and high school, and sometimes in college classes, but observe scientists actually at work, and you see that that's not how it works most of the time. It's not this rigid process that they're supposed to be going through, and we have all sorts of problems with seemingly rigorous research that then has to be called into question. And there is something to the notion that that, as Kuhn put forward back in the 60s, late 60s, early 70s, this notion of paradigms or frameworks. There is something to that. And then we also want to think about science is sort of like this theoretical academic project, but then science is like totally beholden to the use of technology, which is much more practical. And how does that intervene, and what role does that play? So I think that's important. Now, the story of how science came about diverges widely from the romanticized version. Is the romanticized version the sort of standard story that we get about you do some observations and formulate a hypothesis, then do some experiments, and then eventually it gets replicated, and is that the romanticized version? Because if it is, all you have to do is actually like hang out with scientists for a while, and you find out no, it's way more messy and complicated than that, and way more political at any point in time too. To shift gears a little bit, one of the things that Aristotle gets right in the Nicomachean Ethics is saying that political science, hey politike, or you could call it social science if you want, is indeed the architectonic one, because it decides what gets studied in the community, right? So nowadays we would talk about like, well, who gets funded for what sort of research, and towards what ends, and with what sort of measures in mind. Aristotle was seeing that was the case typically a long time ago. So Paul asks, on the reading of Marcus Aurelius, would you give it credit where credit is helpful in the world? Yeah, there's a lot of people who've been very, very much helped by reading Marcus Aurelius. I think he's quite interesting. He's not, I would say if you want more rigorous Stoic stuff, definitely Seneca and Epictetus are important, and Marcus Aurelius, is drawing on Epictetus quite a lot. So I think that that's good too. But I like Marcus Aurelius, and we've been going through the meditations in our local Stoic meetup, book by book by book, one book a month. So I think it's quite good. He's writing to himself. The book is actually called to himself. So you can't take it as like him teaching in an authoritative way or anything like that. But I enjoy it, and I'll say too, I enjoy it much more as a later adult than I did in my teens and 20s when I tried to make sense of it. All right. Upon the face of the abyss, 1,000%, I find journaling very important for myself, reflecting on my days. A lot of people, are very into journaling. I don't do it that much myself, but I usually have sort of an interior discourse going on a lot of the time anyway. So, the Thrill asks, do you sub vocalize when you read? Does that mean like talking to yourself in kind of a low voice? No, I don't usually. The only time I do something like that is when people around me are being noisy and I'm trying to like concentrate on what I'm reading, and then I might do something like that. Paul Hopp, what's your take on Peter Singer's philosophy? Singer's a consistent utilitarian. I am willing to accept some insights from utilitarians, but I'm actually a virtue ethicist, so I think that he's actually off on some things, but I think there's some things that he says that are quite good and useful, and I enjoy teaching him in my classes. Um, so but again, I enjoy teaching Kant too, and I disagree with Kant on a lot of stuff. Let's see here. Gin Stampede. I saw another user asking about Arab states and quoting Ollie's is philosophy just white guys jerking off. Why doesn't Western academia study African or Arab philosophy? Well, they do. I mean, I actually taught classes on Africana philosophy, like when I was down at Fayetteville State University. And here in Milwaukee, we actually have at Marquette University the Aquinas and the Arabs project, and it's one of the places where graduate students are studying Arabic and talking about all the different alls, al-Farabi, al-Kindi, al-Ghazali, and people are getting quite excited about it. So there are people doing it. I think sometimes it could be due to a kind of racism or dismissive attitude towards anything that's not within the Western canon. But I think a lot of the time it's not anything quite so nefarious as that. I think it's just most places the amount of philosophy they're studying is this small, and that's all they know, and that's all they were exposed to. So they don't know that there's much stuff outside of there, and I think that's really what it is. Lyndon has an interesting question here about fitness stuff. What exercises do you love or hate? I love burpees and deadlifts. Most people seem to hate them. I'm not sure what a burpee is. I just use machines. I mean, I used to use free weights a lot in the past, but I'm content to do that. I hate curls. There's something I don't like arm curls, and I don't like leg curls. They're always painful. I don't like the machine where you get on it and you twist from side to side with your abs. I just find that one tedious. What do I like? And I also don't like the leg press, but that's because I've got some pretty damaged knees. I'm missing 2 ligaments in one knee, and the other knee has had to compensate for that for so long that it's kind of hard on my knees. And I'm always like worried, even though I use braces, that something's going to get screwed up. But I do it anyway. What are the exercises I really like? I like rowing. I like flies. I like tricep stuff. I enjoy that. And I like some of the other leg stuff, And I like the crunches. I like doing the sit-up thing where you're holding the thing and you go down and all that. And I actually, I do cardio as well. I really like the rowing machine. You probably stay that on that all day. I'm not sure what it is about rowing that I like, but I do enjoy it quite a bit. And I didn't at first like it, but now I've actually come to like the elliptical. So, that's good. It's good if you like some things. All right, here's a question from Giorgio. Is rational philosophy moral? Aristotle, founder of logic and his own ethics, justified slavery and advocated a ministry of women. How can rational thinkers be so irrational in their views? Well, Aristotle justified slavery in a way, but you do actually want to read Politics Book 1 and see how limited that justification was. He said that most enslavement of Greeks is actually against nature and is just by convention, He had a different attitude towards barbarians, but I think if he was brought up to the present, he'd change his mind about that. I don't know about a ministry of women. Is that coming from the politics? He said some boneheaded things about women, but again, if you had better experiences to draw upon and not the Athenian society that he was living in at the time, he probably would, make more sense. I think it's important to keep in mind that rationality is never like an on-off switch. It's always a continuum, and it's something that also does develop over time as well. And it's also important when we're thinking about authors like Aristotle, we have to be very scrupulously fair to what he does in fact say, and not, engage in sort of wild stuff about justifying slavery. We got to be clear about what he's actually justifying. Um, and I guess you could say he founded his own logic. He founded what he thought what to be logic, um, you know, or more properly, a tool, the organon, right? Um, but how can irrational thinkers be so irrational in their views? I mean, they're human, right? And so you have a choice. You can be very sort of puritanical about them. Be like, oh my gosh, if they made any mistakes, we have to dismiss them. Or you can say, well, I like this part here. This part over here, I think, is problematic. Can we use resources from within Aristotle to criticize Aristotle, to sort of make it work out better? We can say similar stuff about Plato or the Stoics or early Christian thinkers. We can go all the way up to the present, and we can find that I doubt anybody is totally free of grounds for critique or contradiction. The question is, how damaging is it to their projects? So, all right, let's see here. A wits caps rep. Do I think studying might help someone inclined on having negative thoughts? It depends on the philosophy that they're studying. I mean, studying contemporary analytic philosophy or just the latest continental stuff, probably not going to be that helpful. Studying philosophies conceived of as a way of life, like Aristotelianism or Stoicism or Epicureanism or early Christian thought or stuff like that before it kind of lapsed into scholasticism. Even some scholastics could be useful for that. Probably, yeah, could help you, but it's not just by itself. I've brought this up in many conversations. There's a really, really good article by, I think it's Leslie Cosman, on being properly affected, which is in an Aristotle. Yeah, here it is. It's in Essays on Aristotle's Ethics, which is edited by Rorty, Amélie Rorty, not of course the deconstructionist or pragmatist Rorty. And there's a really great discussion in there. Leslie Cosman is the name. Being properly affected, virtues and feelings in Aristotle's Ethics. And there was a line in here that I underlined, I think about 20 years ago. And I think it's really quite good. And it's going through this nice exegesis of Aristotle and talks about this developmental account. And then here, I'm going to read this. Why should we not be prepared to say that a person of steadfast and cultivated virtue who exhibits appropriate feelings in circumstances which he understands correctly, and in which those are precisely the feelings he would want to exhibit, taking into account the entire fabric of his desires, goals, plans, and hopes for himself, why should we not be prepared to say that such a person has chosen those feelings? Nowhere, I believe, does Aristotle say this. What we would like, but do not find, is an extension of the theory of deliberation and practical reasoning to account for the ways in which virtuous persons might be said to have the proper feelings which they have by proeresis, by deliberate choice. And then the article goes on a little bit more and says, in a sense, the theories behind certain religious traditions, psychoanalysis, and disciplines that promise self-transformation and self-mastery might be thought to represent attempts at such an account. And then there's this, sort of suggestion there that, if we were really good Aristotelians, say, maybe what we would need to do is supplement. We don't just use Aristotle by Aristotle. We supplement Aristotle with what we can learn from psychotherapeutic, techniques and spiritual direction and this. And that's, in fact, what contemporary Aristotelians do. Alistair MacIntyre being a great example of somebody who does that. So could philosophy studied in that way help you out? I think it probably could help you out quite a bit. All right. David the Dower, Dr. Sadler, how would you categorize yourself philosophically? As an eclectic. That is, and there's two kinds of eclectics, really. There's the smorgasbord eclectic, who's just like, oh, a little bit of this, a little bit of this. And then there's the eclectics who are like, oh, man, there's a lot of great stuff here. I don't want to just be committed to this one thing, like as if I'm committing to an orthodoxy. I want to take what's best in all of them and synthesize it. And that's very difficult to do. Another word for that is pluralism. And you can think about that as like, kind of like what William James does and advocates in his work as well. So that's good. All right, let's scroll up a little bit. I won't be able to get to everybody, by the way, but I see that there's a lot of side conversations going on, which is nice. And scrolling down, I'm not seeing too many people being jerky to each other. So, all right, John Reeves, Sam Harris, the St. Anselm of today. Well, knowing Anselm pretty well, I would say that's a surprising way to talk about Sam Harris to me. But I don't know, maybe you have something else in mind there. Anthony Fickrey, thoughts on Alvin Plantinga's paper Advice to Christian Philosophers. It's not bad. Had Plantinga read more widely in Christian philosophy, it would have been way better. And that's one of the problems with Plantinga's work, is that he's kind of an interesting guy. I've actually seen him speak before, but he reinvents some wheels that don't need to be reinvented, and the advice that he's giving is it suffers because of that. So it actually spurred an interesting discussion that involved a couple other contemporary thinkers like Eleanor Stumpf at the time too. There's a whole literature out there on it. Factotum, what is your opinion on Varg Vikernes? To which degree can we separate a work of art from its creator, especially if the work expresses the feeling of the artist? I don't think there's any easy answer to that. How it really depends on the genre of the work and what they're doing. Is that the guy who was the black metal fellow who was like burning churches, and I think he killed somebody or something like that? Let me actually look it up here. Convicted of murder and arson. Okay, well, I don't know much about the black metal community in general because it's not my bag. I like Venom, and that's really about it. And I like Venom not because they're black metal, but because of the stuff that they do. So yeah, I don't really have too many feelings on him. Let's see here. Bojadar, I think I may be pronouncing it correctly. The Z with the reverse circumflex. Any thoughts on Nick Land and Alan Watts? I'm not big on either one. I haven't read Nick Land's Fang Noumena. I've always said if people want me to read that book, anybody can feel free to send me a hard copy of it, and I will read it and review it. But I'm not going out of my way, given how much time I've got devoted to other things to read Land. And Alan Watts, he had his time. I'm not myself drawn to mysticism or sort of broad generalizations about Western rationality versus the Eastern approach or stuff like that. I like to be I like to say, well, which Eastern approach are you talking about? And some are more rationalistic and some are less so. And so Watts he's interesting. He's sort of like, and again, people ask me about Thomas Merton as well, and I'm not into that sort of thing. I read Watts quite a bit when I was a teenager and in my early 20s, and I never really bought in, I have to say. So All right. Stoic Code says, newly single needs some advice on courtship. Well, that's a good thing for Valentine's Day, right? Well, I mean, I think that one thing that's important in terms of finding a potential, mate or life partner, or even just somebody who you're going to be enjoying time with for the present or something like that is, you need to be attentive to them and be respectful, and work with a kind of reciprocity. Don't treat them in ways that you wouldn't want to be treated yourself. But you also, that doesn't mean that you have to like put up with anybody doing anything whatsoever. It's important to be able to lay down limits and boundaries and say, listen, I'm okay with this, and this I really like, but this that you're doing over here, I don't like this, and figure out for yourself what's a deal breaker and what's not. And the other thing I would say too is, when you have like a relationship breakup, people always say, oh, there's plenty of fish in the ocean, and that's usually like the one bit of good advice that they give you. Because they also, let's go drinking, or stuff like that. And there really are, there's so many people that you could meet, and there's always like a learning curve and all that, but you don't have to expect that like the first person that you date, that it's automatically going to work out, and then if it doesn't work out, and like maybe they don't call you back, or the date doesn't go well, that's somehow like your failure. It may just be that you weren't on the same wavelength and compatible. So don't let that sort of thing get you too down, I would say. um oh, a little bit later, so wait, what am I saying? Wisdom is my first love. Well, okay, well, that's good. um Let's see. I'm going to scroll down past some side conversation. Um, Canal says, "What do I think of Benedetto Croce, Giovanni Gentile, and Italian idealism?" Well, I think I can't really say much about it because it's been a very long time since I've read Croce, and I don't know if I've even read Gentile. Um, so I'm not really qualified to say very much about it. All right. Let's see. Oh, Volpe and Culto, thoughts on No Country for Old Men? I was a little disappointed with the movie because it had been talked up so much, and it did have some, stars in it who I liked, but I wasn't all that happy with the resolution of it. I thought it was, well done, but it didn't measure up to the hype, so to speak, for me. But I think a lot of people really really enjoy it. So. Mm. Akim Khalatov, what are your views about Marxism? That's almost like, the what about, the medievals, or what about Islam? It depends on what we're talking about. Marxism has turned into its own tradition in the McIntyrean sense. McIntyre, by the way, was a Marxist for a long time. Um, so I think that there's some insights to it that are valid and good. I think that it's been used and abused in many ways that aren't particularly good. I do, resist the trying to blend Marxism into things that it's not, like claiming that it's when somebody uses the term cultural Marxism, I just basically turn them off in my brain, because there's not much that's going to come out of their mouth that's any good. Or when somebody equates Marxism with postmodernism, you say, well, if that's the case, then what was, say, Terry Eagleton doing as a Marxist, complaining about postmodernism, or Samuel Harrington in his The Politics at God's Funeral, or so. They're distinct traditions. But I think carrying out class analyses, and again, that's not really restricted to Marxism. Marx just happened to be a particularly successful sociologist and philosopher and economist in that way. but you can carry out class analysis, and it's quite valid. The notion that economic processes could generate ideologies, I think that's quite true. So does Nietzsche. He also thinks that's true as well. So yeah. All right. Volpes asks, have you seen 1408 philosophical horror film? No, I haven't. That would be interesting. Philip Schofeld, am I single? I am not. I've been married now since 2011. So what is that? 9 years, very happily married. I'm fortunate enough to have, met the person who really is my soulmate. Nice thing to be able to say on Valentine's Day. Doesn't mean that things are ever like, in life automatically easier, that like, every morning we wake up to wonderful violin music and, hearts as if it's an Instagram filter or anything like that. Right. But I do have somebody who's really great across the spectrum, beautiful, brilliant, hardworking, committed, all those sorts of things. All right. Prohem, what philosophical questions do you think about the most often? I would say, a lot of what I'm doing is really concerned with understanding the human being. So you could say I work a lot in the philosophy of human nature, and I'm thinking about like, how do human beings use the limited rationality and limited freedom that we have to expand on that and make it a bit better. But I'm also thinking about pedagogical philosophical questions like, okay, I've got Aristotle here. How do I get this stuff across to undergraduates who have never heard anything about this guy and may not be all that interested in it? Service classes, a lot of people look down on teaching intro classes. Those are the hardest classes to teach. Anybody can teach graduate students. Man, that's simple. They're self-motivated. They've already read a lot of the literature. They know the jargon. You just kind of point them at stuff, and you don't even have to teach a class if you're doing a grad seminar. You just say, okay, week 1 you're presenting, week 1 you're presenting, week 1 you're presenting. That's the easiest thing in the world. Teaching undergraduates who are not philosophy majors to appreciate what's going on in philosophy, that is tough. And so I devote a lot of thought to how to do that. Let's see here. Gottfried Keller, as a former Catholic, I would like to ask you the following. Why do you believe in God, and what makes Catholicism more accurate than any other versions of Christianity? I don't actually think Catholicism is more accurate in any sort of sense, but I can't see, not being in any of the churches that trace themselves back effectively to the apostles, because I know plenty of church history, and I have a strong appreciation for the Christian intellectual traditions going all the way back. I mean, you see right here next to me the church fathers, right? And I why do I believe in God? There's no one single like thing that, and I think this is the case for most people. There's no one single thing that's like the linchpin. It's not like I read the ontological argument one day and I was like, holy crap, there it is. Now everything else falls into place. And I've said this many times, but I think it's worth saying again. Myself, I've always found that belief in God and all of that doesn't like solve problems for you. It just makes things way more complicated, and adds to your list of stuff you got to do and think about. And I like the thinkers for whom God being in the picture didn't make things simple. So like Kierkegaard, for example, right? Kierkegaard, he takes a leap of faith. Well, it sure takes a long time to get around to it, doesn't it? And after he does it, he's still not saying everything has been solved. He writes book after book after book after book, or Pascal or Augustine, or Anselm. You might say, well, Anselm, he was a monk. Yeah, he chose to be a monk, right? And then he got stuck being abbot, and he got stuck being bishop. And he's writing in the Proslogion, and he's saying, I can't find God. And yet I can't escape God. And there's all this paradoxical stuff about God. How can he be this and this at the same time? Those are the things that are really interesting to probe, and I'm attracted to the thinkers for whom that's more of a problem. That when the atheist apologist comes to them and they're like, "Yes, but what about this?" They're like, "That is a real problem. Yeah, let's sit here and think about that a bit." The problem of evil, real serious issue. I'm not going to try to sweep it under the rug or anything. So those are the things that I've found interesting. All right, I'm going to have to go. Wow, we're already at an hour and 5 minutes. I'm going to have to go pretty soon because it's going to be time for us to have our dinner and stuff like that. So I'm just going to grab a few questions at random and take them. Oh, well, here's a question from Land of Lions, Abyssinia. Have I heard of Zera Jacob, an African Ethiopian philosopher who had similar views to Rene Descartes? And would it be possible to make video on him? I certainly have heard of him. I've read glosses on him. I haven't read him yet, but I find what I've read about him quite intriguing. And yeah, I could make videos on him once I've actually read and digested his stuff, and that probably wouldn't happen anytime this semester because I'm teaching and making videos on for my classes on things that I need done. But he does sound quite interesting. So, that's a possibility. Pro Hoem, do I also listen to Rage Against the Machine? I don't, but we're going to be seeing them in concert here at Alpine Valley I think in the summer because my wife likes them quite a lot. And so, I'm open to listening to them. Have I studied Malebranche since I seem to interest myself in the Christian philosophy of the French language? I have, but it's been a very long time since I read Malebranche. That was back in graduate school as well. So, yeah. Let's see there are a lot of back and forth things here. Oh, here's a good one from Stoicode. Is loving yourself first vain, or should one put their partner first? Why make it that binary? Why not try to do both? Why not love yourself and respect yourself enough to sometimes insist on like saying what you need and enforcing boundaries and stuff like that, and love the other person, and try to work out a balance between the two. I think that's probably the healthiest way, and try to find somebody else who can have a similar take and respect that take. If you can find it, that would be kind of nice. I realize I'm setting the bar kind of high. So, here's a good one to go out on with Nick. And so then I'll have to beg off after this. Are Heidegger's lectures on other philosophers, Aristotle or Kant or Nietzsche, worth exploring? If so, are there any particular you would recommend? Yeah, Heidegger's lectures on other people are often quite good. I wouldn't recommend the Hegel one because it's very short and he only goes up to the self-consciousness section. What's there is pretty good, but you're going to be disappointed because you're like, well, what the hell? The phenomenology, he only did this much of it, right? But Heidegger has some really great lectures on Aristotle. You're getting Heidegger on Aristotle, but there's a lot of good insights there. He's got a lot of good stuff on Plato. His Nietzsche lectures, I think, are quite superb. There's a lot of them. There's 4 volumes of Nietzsche lectures. And then he's got a smattering of other stuff as well. And we're fortunate in that a lot of it's been translated at this point. So I would say it's worth checking out. It's sort of like with other main figures. Like when you read Kojève on Hegel, you're really getting a lot of Kojève and not as much Hegel. Same thing with Heidegger on Aristotle, right? It's not a very close. It is a close reading of the text, but it's a Heideggerian close reading of the text. but you can say the same thing about other people who do history of philosophy stuff, like Deleuze, for example, right? Deleuze's book on Leibniz is The Fold is great, but it's Deleuze on Leibniz. Um, and so I think that's a good fitting end to all of this. Couldn't get to everybody's questions, but um, I never do. So hope all of you have a great evening or morning or whatever it is where you happen to be. I know some of you are over in Europe, and so it's got to be middle of the night now for you. So thanks for joining in, and I'll do more of these now that I've got a good mic and my schedule is more or less regular, and I'll probably do more of these on Fridays, quite frankly, because that's one of the days that I usually have a little bit of extra time. So, all right, have a great Valentine's Day or the day after if you're already there, and I'll see you at the next event.